Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wiser Dome TV. Today, I have a very, very special episode in the works for you guys. These are two of my favorite scholars, contemporary scholars. Man, they put it down. Are extremely knowledgeable, very well versed, and it's an honor to build with them. They have recently written a an essay called "The Paradoxes of Being" on Western humanist epistemology and the digitization of racial domination and warfare in the Fourth Industrial Revolution using cutting edge information and artificial intelligence technologies. Dr. Myron Clay Gilmore and Reny Taylor, appreciate y'all for coming through.
Oh man, definitely appreciate you for having us, man. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely, man. First, before we even get into it, um, the paper is amazing. Like I was telling you guys off camera, that this paper helped me to understand Sylvia Wynter's framework even more. As you know, she's not an easy read, and y'all did an amazing job walking the reader through, early Western humanist epistemologies, Sylvia Wynter's idea of man one, man two, how this relates to, you know, uh, artificial intelligence technologies and how we are policed. Y'all, man, it's a amazing, amazing paper. So I just wanted to give y'all props.
Appreciate that, man.
No doubt, no doubt. So, um, if let's start. So you open with Winter's framework of man. Why is this concept foundational to understanding how Western thought has shaped the very category of human, and how has Black life historically been positioned in relation to it?
Cool. I guess I'll start this one off. Um, Winter's conception of man is foundational, at least through my reading, for two main reasons. The first one being is that when you think of humanism, um, as Winter explains it, it's often told as a coming of age story. So when Europe sort of comes into consciousness with itself. And so oftentimes this story is told as Europe sort of comes out of the dark ages and it comes into this secular enlightenment.
Hmm.
And what Winter shows is that they leave out a very central component of that. And that component is that at the same time that you get humanism, you get also the birth of dehumanization. So humanism and colonialism are birthed at the same time. They have the same cognitive political universe. And so there's a sort of de-godding, or to use her term, de-supernaturalization that happens within the 16th century that occurs that births humanism on the one hand, but also births this other. So
Hmm.
while Europe is coming into consciousness with itself, it also comes into consciousness of others. And
Hmm.
these human others are often rationalized as the irrational or rationalized as the deselected once we get into man too. And so it's foundational because this self-discovery that we hear when we talk about Europe, and this idea that they go across the world, this 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 era of discovery, it is simultaneously the discovery of non-European peoples as irrational others. So Winter insists that there was no man without the Negro.
Hmm.
There was no rational subject without the non-rational subject, without the savage, right? And this relationship is constitutive in the sense that it's not incidental. Um, Blacks became the physical referent for the negation of humanity at the same
Hmm.
time. And so the reason why it matters is because Black life has always been positioned outside of the category of the human. And so it's not just excluded, but it becomes this foil against which man is defined, against which it is birthed, and it reproduces a hierarchy, even as it claims a sort of universal humanity. So
Hmm.
the genre of man is what Winter is trying to carve out. The idea that Europe superimposed a universal category of the human. And so Winter is trying to sort of allow us to see that there are multiple modes and genres of the human. And so if we don't interrogate this overrepresentation of man, then we miss out how colonialism,
Mhm.
anti-blackness is pretty much hardwired into the epistemological grounding of our modern world.
Indeed. And so like there's an exclusivity when it comes to who's determined as man.
Correct. Then it while it offers while it offers a understanding of the human, it also bursts the negation of man, which is the black.
Can you guys explain I guess at first just so the people can understand who as the people who may not have read Winter, can you explain Man 1 and Man 2?
For sure. Um, so Man One emerges with the Renaissance and the early modern state. So it births this understanding of the human as a political, rational, civic. It's it de-gods in the sense that it's the first conceptual secular understanding that replaces the Christian theological absolutism of the medieval time. So think of it this way: before man is authored, the human is pretty much understood in terms of divine intervention, supernatural law. So there was this idea that, at least in Europe itself, that man was the center of the universe. And because man had fallen from original sin out of God's grace, it became the center of the universe.
Mm,
And what ends up happening with, let's say, Copernicus. So Copernicus displaces man from the center of the universe. What ends up happening is you get this de-godding in Europe, and it creates the space for the physical sciences, which we know as astrology, astronomy, things of that nature, because everything was understood as natural philosophy prior to the development and the authoring of man. So man becomes the political rational subject that it tries to obtain itself through through the mechanisms of this state. And so uh pretty much Copernicus, Galileo, they sort of displace this medieval geocentric uh, understanding of the prior world, and they offer, and this goes into the scientific revolution in sort of a sense, and in doing so, man one is author. It's the rational political subject. It's mapped onto Europe, and you also get colonialism, as I had stated earlier. So basically, man one depends on this colonized colonizer split,
mhm,
and so and it's based off this political rational subject. And then when you get into the late 18th, early 19th century, you get the Darwinian evolution, 1959, origin of species, and there's this biologicalization of man. And so instead of man being a political irrational, man is thought to be, it starts in a biological rootedness where there are those who are selected and those who are deselected. And so instead of black people being the irrational savages, now they are the deselected
mm.
under the evolutionary logics of the late 18th, early 19th century. And so this is where you get the biologicalization of man two under the framework now of political economy.
Mm.
Because under man one, it was a rational political subject, but now man two is biologized under the idea of homo economics, economic man, which is economic man. And it's based on this idea of political economy. And so there's this rational idea that man is self-interested and seeks to procure his own sustenance. And so these two frameworks of man are adopted, superimposed, and universalized as if it is the only kind of being.
Hmm,
And so it splits uh, in an epistemic way how we understand not just the human but the non-human, because the non-human, the black, the other, is now biologized as this deselected um understanding where we are thought to be not just savage now but biologically so,
hmm,
like biologically determined
hmm.
to be inferior.
And would this be kind of what leads to the rise of race science, racist anthropology,
Absolutely.
and things of that nature?
Absolutely. So in the 19th century, late 18th, early 19th, you get ethnology, you get evolutionism, you get comparative anatomy, all of those
Hmm.
scientists, race science, all of that
Yeah.
during this time.
In the paper, you also, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talked about this kind of also being the beginning of, I guess, the taxonomy of the human species, right? And as far as how the categorization, and I guess that would also mean that we would kind of be left out of the category of what it means to be a man.
I
When it
mean,
comes,
it's one thing about that I think is worth mentioning, actually. Like I think that's the big significance of Man One and Man Two, that you're getting a peek at a period in history where the human taxonomy was the largest it's ever been, right? The medieval Islamic world did not colonized the Americas, right? So the size and the large amount of materials that Europeans in the 16th, 17th century are going through, when you're starting to see man to be born and the rise of these new types of sciences alongside the natural sciences, I think that's the real significance of it, right?
Mhm,
That how we view the human species is now being subject to scientific scrutiny,
mhm, right.
right? And it's part of the basic assumptions, Black people in particular, and Native people in the Americas, particularly at the height of slavery and the height of colonialism, they're non-humans.
Mhm. Wow. Um, when we talk about Western humanism, I guess even in its so most quote unquote enlightened form, they carry forward a commitment to the classification and hierarchy of humans, and one that makes anti-Black violence appear rational or even necessary.
Yeah.
Um, Before reading this paper, I didn't even think of, I guess, Western humanism in those terms and how it relates now. What kind of, and I guess when writing this paper, what kind of inspired you guys to connect, early Western humanist epistemologies to the, racial domination and warfare in the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
I mean, I don't know, man. Me and Rennie, we've been reading Winter on our own since like 2021.
Wow.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been trying to, really wrap my mind around her ideas since around 2017 or so. It's when I first read her alone. But then me and Rennie connected. We started reading her really close, going through some of her citations and the arguments she cited. And I think it's a link she makes. But I think the threads were just never pulled. I mean, Rennie, you could disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but most of the
Oh, I
way
will.
she's engaged, oh yeah, right. I mean, look, most of the way she's engaged is like through gender, right?
Mm,
It's really
mhm,
nothing
Facts.
about, scientific development. And, you know, with my reading of Huey P. Newton and the importance of military technology, I just felt like this was a link we could easily make,
mhm.
and that nobody else has.
Indeed.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
do y'all,
I
do you,
definitely
I was
no,
just
go
gonna say,
ahead.
do you
Sorry.
guys feel like she's often misrepresented or not explored enough as far as in the depth of her work?
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. I
Yeah, I
think so
mean,
for sure.
yeah, like the years me and Rennie was going through her really closely, you couldn't find a graduate course in the discipline of philosophy that would take you through her work.
Mm,
Right? Those classes just are not offered.
Hmm.
So that means just how uncommon it is. And then when people do engage with her, basically is to read her as a black feminist,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, me and Rennie, I mean, we go back and forth with these people sometimes, but we just kind of felt like that debate is tired.
Hmm.
It
It
is.
has no textual basis. So why would we write about that?
Right.
Right? When
Hmm.
she's telling you that scientific innovation has been yoked to the domination of non-whites,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I largely agree. I think when you when you get Winter and when you speak about Winter, it's largely within a black feminist paradigm. Even as she rejects even using gender
Hmm.
as some sort of project because she sees that as envelope within Western man. But what sort of grounded me and Myron, I think, into understanding Western man and its epistemic ruptures within you know, the fourth industrial revolution is that we start to take very critical note of how there's this paradox of being in the sense that Winter describes this Janus face characterization of science
Hmm.
at the same time that you get the physical sciences, which is, astrology, or what she's calls ethno-astrologies in earlier papers. You
Right.
also get colonization.
Hmm.
Why
Right.
is that?
Right.
How is it that we have this intellectual breakthrough with Copernicus sort of influencing that intellectual breakthrough, but at the same time you get colonialism,
Right.
and 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 then you have the Darwinian evolution. This is a epistemic breakthrough, right? Natural selection is a breakthrough,
Hmm.
but it also biologizes man,
Hmm.
and black people become the nadir of the representation of the non-human as man to his birth under the logics of political economy. And so this Janus face nature, this paradox of being, which as we all know is the title of the paper, is I think what intrigued us to say what that looks like now
Right.
with the fourth industrial revolution, with artificial intelligence, counterinsurgency. What does that all look like today?
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think, yeah, I think with the Marwin's work in counterinsurgency going into AI, like Jesus Christ, it
Right.
maps so well
Hmm.
onto how to understand the configuration of the human through Winter's work. So, yeah.
And I mean, and look, I started a reading group on Winter in 2019, my first year of grad school at Texas A&M. And I'll never forget reading 1492 the first time and her saying that it was a paradoxical type of thing, right? I completely disagreed at first, right? To me, I want to say I wanted to, the nationalist in me wanted to say it was completely negative.
Hmm.
There's nothing good that happened
Hmm.
for Black people. But she says, no, there's technological and scientific innovation that adds to human autonomy. And I think you see the same contradiction in AI. Like, I want medical technology that can predict pancreatic cancer 10 years ahead of time. But I don't want, my phone hacked with Pegasus and able to live stream surveil me
Hmm.
because I said the wrong thing about the prime minister of the country I live in.
Right. Right.
It's just
Yeah.
like, this project she has of reconfiguring thought to unyoke these from one another. It's hard. It's a hard problem for me to even acknowledge sometimes, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to put our intellectual resources toward.
Absolutely. There's one thing that I notice in a lot of discourse that I've been privy to is a lot of brothers and sisters feel like science and STEM alone is will liberate us, right? And I think um, what you guys do in this paper is amazing because it kind of conceptualizes the idea that modern science in many ways still operates on a colonial logic that excludes um, black people as being human. And I wanted to kind of ask you there, like, with modern science, and then you speak about, the transition from man one and man two, or even from, idea of men based on religious and Christianity, Christian ideas, and then the I guess, the transition from man one to man two, and we look at science, and especially now, but I'm pretty sure then as well that it's a break from superstition, it's a break from theology. But in the paper, you show that it still carries those forward, those logics of domination, just in secular form. Can you guys just kind of expound on that a little bit more? Because I think it's important because I don't think sometimes people really understand how far the rabbit hole goes when, especially those who just push science alone as something that can liberate us from the condition that we're in.
You cool
Yeah.
if I take this one, Rennie?
Yeah, then you could take part of it as
Yeah.
well. I was just gonna note that so earlier when I said that, so humanism sort of broke from the church.
Hmm.
It broke from the idea of this theological absolutism. Um and then you get the medieval Christianity organized in world terms. It was understood as this break between the spirit and the flesh. But the Renaissance Enlightenment period, you see the secularization of these categories: rational, irrational, civilized, savage, and things of that nature. With Mantu, you get the evolved, the de-evolved, or the deselected.
Hmm.
Notice that these terms change,
Hmm.
but the classificatory logics persist.
Hmm.
So just because humanism breaks with the church and then it becomes secularized, notice that these classificatory logics, this divide. I mean, when Du Bois talks about the color line, these
Hmm.
divides still are extant in the very logics and fabrics of society that has been universalized based on this bifurcation between the colonized and the colonizer. And so what 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 ends up happening in these most liberal forms, in these most enlightened forms, is the structure of anti-blackness and the
Hmm.
negation of black people as human, even though it changes in terms, the form and the structure is still apparent and
Hmm.
it's still there. And so it still reproduces the other
Right.
in anti-black ways. And so this is one of the things that Wynter is able to show and delineate throughout her corpus, because she lets us know that these are secularized versions. While one is hybridly secular and the other is purely secular, you still have this classificatory logic.
Hmm.
And so even in its most enlightened and liberal forms, right? I mean, think about feminism.
Yeah.
uh, you get feminism, but you still get this negation of the human.
Hmm.
And that negation is black.
Right.
Uh, think about missionary universalism. So missionary universalism was the idea that as long as you were Christian, you could be redeemed. But
Hmm.
then missionary universalism goes into liberal racism, which is the idea that all peoples throughout society should be like white people.
Hmm.
And then once you get to counterinsurgency, what do you get? You get all societies should be like the Western state. It should be in the image of the United States. So it's the same classificatory logic.
Hmm.
And this even though the terms change, the structure is pretty much the same, anti-black.
Yeah. Indeed. Did you want to add on, Mar?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we actually gave an example that I think, really gets to the point of how science continues to function in this way. The co-founder of Predictive Policing, which is actually an independent company, is an anthropologist at UCLA, Jeffrey Brentingham, and he and other professors at MIT actually put together a study to forecast crimes by using data from Iraqi insurgents,
Hmm.
right? And they did this domestically. So these criminals were LA gang members.
Wow.
Right? So they're using data from LA gang members and predictive techniques to try to figure out when Black men in LA will commit crimes based on the patterns that they observed in active war zones, right? So you can see how, foreign wars against terrorism are conducted by integrating cutting edge scientific techniques.
Hmm.
They also got the assistance from an MIT political scientist who helped them with the imaging and type of software program where they could interact with Iraqis in a makeshift market and learn the cultural sensitivity needed to extract information from them.
Yeah.
We could see all of these new types of technologies, what we consider computer science today,
Hmm.
being used to actually advance, American foreign policy.
Mm. Wow. See, man, that's deep. You also trace like AI and predictive systems back to like Cold War era counterinsurgency programs. What's important about understanding that genealogy, and what does it reveal about the intended function of these tools? You kind of went over it some already, but I think
Yeah.
that's an important question for the people to understand.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that, counterinsurgency and really the target of savage males, it it's a type of creative tonic, right? Like it's a symbol in the Western mind that inspires ingenuity and innovation to track, to measure, to surveil, to better kill,
Mm,
right? And I think this is a pattern that goes back to the Enlightenment ideas that Winter is really focused on.
hmm
It's that
hmm
obsession with perfection. And this comes from the theological period before, right?
hmm
So this goes back to Augustine in Western philosophy, right? But
hmm
we can reach a pure state of happiness, a pure state of perfection by being in unity with God.
mm.
Once that God is gone, knowledge becomes the tool to accomplish that perfection. And that's why you see the rise of these sciences. And I think when you look at the deep history of colonialism, what you see is internet and information technologies be pioneered for the same purpose.
hmm
Right? First deployed in places like Vietnam to actually predict the rise of revolutionaries.
mm.
Internet, what became the internet, was actually created for this purpose. So when you see it used as basically a way to brain tap a person and keep an infinite amount of knowledge to them and get psychological profiles on select people, that's the intended use of information technologies by the United States Department of Defense.
I want to take a just a quick detour, but it still all relates. Because just hearing you brothers talk about that, and then in its relation to racial domination and warfare, AI technologies, and then and so we know with the whole quote unquote Donald Trump crackdown, we're sending the National Guard to DC, ICE, militarized police, and then he talks about doing it in Chicago, Memphis, and other places that we know are either black cities or have a really large black population. Um, when we talk about counterinsurgency, right? The thing that and also pacification and even socialization in socializing a community or a certain part of a community to accepting these things, right? Because I'm starting to see, obviously, don't get me wrong, there are people who are in the community in DC, in Chicago, in Memphis that are pushing back heavily on this. But we also see instances of um, black people saying, "Hey, man, we got to get these quote unquote YNs in check, and we got to, and the National Guard got to do it. Then, so be it." How does when it comes to counterinsurgency, right? How does that happen as far as to socialize a group of people to welcome their own demise?
Yeah, man, I think, it happens through a good propaganda, right? So,
Hmm.
like another example we mentioned was this RTRG tool that was done for the same purposes, deployed for the same purposes in Iraq and Afghanistan. They took so much data from this group. They had all text messages. They took the price of food. They took traffic patterns, unemployment rates, and that was where they would selectively apply pressure to the population to ensure they follow the
Hmm.
institution that the Western power set in place, right? And you've seen a very similar thing with us, right? I mean, there's this guy, Moya Dayan, who was actually a counterinsurgent, a Jewish counterinsurgent in Palestine. And I mean, he put it really like in a succinct way. He said, "You have the goal is to convince the target population that your institutions are the best they can get,
Hmm.
right? They don't have to love you, but they have to be convinced that the best civil administration they can get is from your government as the white counterinsurgent state, right? And you're seeing this type of process take place with Black people over hundreds of years, right? That we're better off not being self-determined because we'll harm women. We're
Yeah.
better off being under the boot of our oppressors because at least I could ride around without a YN scaring me,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
Yeah. And I think these counterinsurgent technologies have also been used to strategize and to socially engineer as well.
Mm,
So in the paper, we talk about Project Camelot and Project Agile and how these were tools that essentially were were there to be used to model after insurgent behavior. Um, you see that there's a there's a domestic and then there's a domestic internal colonial counterinsurgency going on because me being in DC, just going on a quick tangent really
yeah,
quick.
of course.
Um, you know, Trump he implements the 740 section 740 of the Home Rule Act. Then you get Mayor Bowser who double downs by authoring the 090 within that, which basically integrates the federal troops past 30 days and allows this to rule for more than the tenure of 30 days that Congress wasn't going to allot or didn't want to vote on, let's
Yeah.
say. But the reason why this is possible in many respects is what you called out earlier.
Mm,
There has been a lot of discourse and language around crime, robbery, YNs. And when we understand counterinsurgency as social engineering with the goal of pacification and assimilation, we understand how important discourses and language are to produce the
mm,
kinds of strategies that they use in DC, that you see with Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta with Cop City, that you saw in 2020 with Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, that you see in Philadelphia with the mayor. So these strategies that are used come off the backs of certain kinds of technologies, yes, because we understand that a lot of these technologies, especially with Cold War counterinsurgency, um, treat the populations as systems
mm,
that could be mapped, that could be measured.
mhm,
And I mean, even if you go back to Robert Allen, he talks about how in the 1960s, after the rebellions and revolutions, the corporate conglomerates came together with the goal of turning Black power into Black capitalism. And so
mm,
this is a product of social engineering and pacification, and you can see that in today. Um, but today we have the technological capability and military apparatus that is birthed out of what we've been talking about today,
yeah.
an understanding of humanism, and that's how you get cybernetics. Cybernetics is birthed out of a certain understanding of humanism and how it's framed through
Mm.
systems, feedback loops, and whatnot, and regulation. So yeah.
Yeah, that leads to, and just going to stay right here just for a second. And Rennie, I've seen you mention, especially during I guess the first quote unquote phase of the so-called DC crackdown, and um, you mentioned Robert Allen. Can you talk about um, why you, why it's important to kind of see like the idea of us being policed and treated as an internal colony in the context of this whole thing? Because I've seen people when this is expressed, maybe it's because they're not really familiar with the idea of internal colonialism, but I've seen a lot of pushback It's just in discourse that I've had. But whenever I saw this first hit the news, you immediately was like, look, this is evidence of internal colonialism. Can you kind of just expound on that for people who may not even be familiar with what internal colonialism is?
Yeah, so internal colonialism has a very widespread history. It's been widely debated. Um, some people see its geological origins um, in the 19th century with Delaney and where he articulates a nation of the nation. I mean, you get a lot of this understanding of Black people as an internal colony within the Black conventions of the 19th century. By the 20th century, of course, we know about Harry Haywood's Black Belt thesis and things of whatnot. It's been largely described. When I'm talking about it, especially in regards to what we're seeing around the cities of America, it's been articulated as domestic colonialism. It's been articulated as semi-colonialism.
Hmm.
I mean that's what Du Bois called it. Um, it's been articulated as internal colonialism. But the idea is roughly that we are a nation within a nation. Some would say that we are a colony within the empire of the United States. And so we are subjected to certain forms of brutality based on what we've described earlier uh, as this negated category of the human,
Hmm.
just within the imperial core.
Right.
And so when we look at what's going on in DC, specifically Ward 8, where I'm from, where I was born, um, Ward 8 across the bridge is the poorest part of the city, bar none. And it's interesting because historically, Ward 8 was technically part of PG County, Maryland
Hmm.
in the late 1700s. However, uh, DC was able to obtain some land from both Arlington County, which is Virginia, and Maryland to make it a federal district. What makes DC so unique is that it is not a state. And because it is not a state, DC is subject to a kind of policing that is not seen anywhere else.
Hmm.
So anytime you are in DC, even prior to what we see with these federal task force, you are subject to not just DCPD,
Hmm.
but you're subject to Metro Police, you're subject to Secret Service, you're subject to the ATF, you're subject to Capitol Police, and you're sometimes subject to the National Guard. This is
Hmm.
simultaneously.
Wow.
There are so many different forces within DC because guess what? The federal government sits within DC. The CIA is across the water in Virginia, and the Pentagon is right there, cat corner to DC. It's very adjacent. And so at any point when you're in DC, specifically downtown, you are always on federal property.
Hmm.
And all of those federal properties have their own police
Hmm.
and their own surveillance systems. And so just in that capacity alone, DC, specifically its Black residents, which is formerly known as Chocolate City because it had the largest percentage of Black people for a very long time, even higher than Detroit
Hmm.
at one point. The Black residents are subject to colonial rule, which is tantamount to the same kinds of violences and brutalities that you would see in the third world. Now, this has been debated by various authors, whether that be the neo-colonialism that we see today, but first authored by Robert Allen when he puts internal colonialism within the neo-colonial model.
Hmm.
This has been debated by Robert Staples, who uses fourth world theory in his articulation of the urban plantation.
Hmm.
This has been debated by scholars like Woodard, Kamazi Woodard, who understand this articulation a little differently. This has been debated by scholars like Charles Pennerhughes,
Yeah.
who authors a new geo-structured understanding of internal colonialism. So we have many different uh, understandings and articulations, but one thing that remains is that Black people are subjected to a brutality within the imperial core that not just is an analogy of what we've seen in the third world, but materially is something that we've experienced here. And so, to answer your question more concretely, DC residents in Ward 8 uh, bear the brunt of the colonial
Mm,
violence because they are all impacted in a very small area,
mhm.
and they are over policed by all of those agencies that I was just
Wow.
speaking to.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I just want to,
Yeah.
throw in here. I think this is
Hmm.
the significance of our paper as well, because I mean, there is a lot of variation with internal colonialism theory, but once this paper is released next month, there will be no more debate in this space
Yeah.
about the fact that when the first AI laboratories were being created for the purposes of surveillance, it was done so with the explicit aspiration to socially engineer the entire world.
Mm.
Right, so it starts in Vietnam, and as we show, this actually ends up being a global endeavor that the United States takes on itself as the victor of World War II.
Wow. In the paper, you mentioned projects like not only COINTELPRO, which most people know, but Camelot and Project Agile. Um, can you talk about those programs, especially Project Agile and Camelot, and how they operationalize race as data, and what does that history, help us to see in today's digital systems?
Yeah, yeah, particularly Camelot, man. I think Camelot is important because it gets to what I was just saying, right?
Hmm.
Like Camelot was discovered by a branch of the Students for the Democratic Society um, at I think either Princeton or Harvard, and they had all of these government declassified documents on counterinsurgency, right, throughout Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and other places. And what they found is that database computer systems and algorithmic systems were being used with certain types of identifying variables, political beliefs, shopping patterns, age, political party, to see which groups of people were more at risk to engage in revolt,
Hmm.
right? And to preemptively stop them. And this preemptive part is important, right? Because it goes back to what I was saying about this enlightenment search for perfection. The goal is not just to crush the enemy. The goal is to predict the a rise of the enemy before the enemy knows it will be one.
Right,
Okay,
right.
this is the explicit aspiration by 1969, right? Projects like Camelot, they were protested against. The protest did not stop the operations in Camelot. There was an explosive release of some journalistic findings in the 1970s that found out this was being widespreadly practiced on Americans
Hmm.
going into the 70s, very similar types of tactics. So today, what you see is those same types of predictive and forecasting maneuvers under the guise of criminality,
Mm.
right? So they don't have to put race,
Yeah,
right? They can even use location-based
like zip
predictive
codes
algorithms,
and stuff, right? Like
right?
quote unquote high
Yeah,
crime areas.
that's right. That's right.
Right.
Or even just reports,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
Black people are more likely to report crime because they're
Ah.
likely to
Hmm.
be victims,
Right, right,
right? So
right.
you can take race out of it,
Hmm.
still end up based on bad data because police themselves collect data
Hmm.
depending on where they look and where they go. And we don't have to guess where white police officers look and go, right?
Right, right, right.
So, so based on the past arrest
Mhm.
statistics, what you're going to find. If you go off the reports, because Black people are more likely to be victims, you know what you're going to find. And if you use zip codes based that uses past data, you know
Mhm.
where you go, right?
Mhm.
Still seeing race being drawn up on, but instead of ideas like the savage, we have ideas like criminality, right?
Right. Well, what you kind of mentioned in the paper as well, and I thought it was profound. And just if you can expound on it a little bit, is like when you
Right.
talk about this data and we talk about crime statistics and how and the nature in which we are policed and over policed, um, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, is which
Right.
was what was said. Can you talk about that some?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the gendered logic of this is really important, right? So
Hmm.
like look, the savage male is the target of savage warfare, which is counterinsurgency's first iteration.
Hmm.
And I think the latest expression of this is under crime control. And you see a particular relationship this has to Black men and this broader logic that you'll see in counterinsurgency going back 200-300 years, where the men of the target group are particularly seen as prone to violence, right? So, because black men have been so targeted by the criminal justice system, when departments like New Orleans Police Department or the Chicago Police Department equip themselves with predictive policing technologies, they end up harassing young black men, particularly between 15 and 35, right?
Hmm.
So it becomes self-fulfilling. You're going to catch them doing something because you were over there.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
once you catch them doing something, it's proof that you should go over there again,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, I mean, data scientists call this junk in, junk out,
Mm, mm,
right? That's what's happening and being framed as public safety.
hmm. Hmm. Wow. Um, I even saw recently somebody sent me earlier today it was a sister in Detroit who got arrested in her home at her home because uh facial recognition software said that she was a carjacker, right? And she ended up losing her lawsuit against the Detroit Police Department. And again, it brought me back to what you guys were talking about in this paper. One one thing I was going to ask uh, was, about, I guess, predictive policing as a continuation of Western humanist epistemology, but I think you've already kind of uh, explained that. But for people who may be still, not really understanding what predictive policing is, right? Can you talk about that? Because you mentioned Nexus 7, I believe, in the paper as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think it's sometimes called intelligence-driven policing,
Hmm.
intelligence-driven prosecution. But I think what you're seeing is a broader shift in the post 9/11 period of warfare itself and policing as a result, right? So a lot of the predictive posture that we find in the post 9/11 period really has its roots in the counterterrorism against the Black Liberation Army in the 1970s, right? To be able to predict certain terrorist attacks, they called it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But after 9/11 and the World Trade Center collapse, you see a new type of investment in technology to profile people and predict revolt.
Hmm.
It's really materialized. I mean, Afghanistan was really a laboratory for this type of stuff with Nexus 7 and the tools that became Nexus 7. But at the same time, domestic police departments are getting equipped with the same types of technology, tools, and funding.
Hmm.
So there's this huge pipeline from the executive branch of surplus military equipment and similar technology, communications signals technology to local police departments. And so this is giving rise to this new approach to policing to make it more cost effective, to save people preemptively. And this is often the narrative that's around the introduction of new military technology. Believe it or not, aerial bombardment was also justified as a predictive type of preemptive thing that would lead to less murder overall because of overwhelming force, right? So in this case, overwhelming surveillance will lead to less crime overall because we'll be able to profile and be in the place before the crime can happen. So you've seen the kind of proto approach with this with
Hmm.
Brooklyn policing, right? Just stopping everybody you see, right, at all times to try to preemptively stop crime. But I think racism has this type of logic deeply embedded within it, right?
Hmm.
And Rennie was saying, like with missionary universalism, those theological underpinnings are so important because once the savage becomes an object of science, there really is this search for the perfect ways of killing him,
Hmm.
Yeah.
of tracking him, you know.
And that's what I think is the ultimate paradox of being, because even here, you understand that these technologies, these coin strategies, they don't escape the logic of man. It just become redefined in the
Hmm.
digital age.
Hmm.
So now you have this technical knowledge that has this sort of veneer of neutrality, this
Hmm.
language of neutrality, uh, with its predictions, with its regulations, but at the same time, it just masks colonial domination. It's still racial governance.
Right.
It's just masked, it's just veiled, and it doesn't in any format escape the logics of man.
Mm.
It's still very much apparent. And I think that is the ultimate importance of understanding these epistemic ruptures within the foundations of Winter's understanding of man.
And earlier, you kind of mentioned you mentioned this on a human, uh, I guess, a societal level, and then even on a national level. In the paper, you say the same logic is when the West says, "Hey, these are uh, what was the word that developed and undeveloped nations, right?"
Yeah,
And I thought that was extremely profound because I never thought about it that way, but I mean, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the
yeah,
same thing.
yeah. Because what she's describing is how these classificatory logics are structured in a way that they simply become universalized and mapped onto the human,
Hmm.
just in different terms.
Yeah.
So, as stated earlier, of course, you had the missionary universalists who were telling people that, hey, if you accept Christ, you can be redeemed.
Hmm.
And then with liberal racism, hey, if you're like white people, you can be the best of in middle class terms. If you are like white people, you can be the best that man has to offer. And in counterinsurgent development, you must be like a Western state. You must be a liberal democracy. That's why we see what we see in the world over. Uh, those nations that are not liberal democracies, those nations that want to intervene and become socialists, communists,
Hmm.
they're not given the same kind of chance. It's actually where the production of counterinsurgency is more enforced
Hmm.
because these genres of the human are still trying to be superimposed on,
Hmm.
and that's how you pretty much get them in line
Right. Right.
through these strategies.
And much of the public discourse around, I guess, algorithmic bias focuses on fairness or inclusion, but your work suggests a deeper problem that systems are working exactly as intended. Why is the bias frame insufficient? Um, because I think Netflix has uh, a documentary on bias in, artificial intelligence or bias in these computing systems, but it doesn't really get to the root of what we're talking about here.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think the bias frame is insufficient or is insufficient for many reasons, but I think the primary reason is that, it the implicit assumption is that if I can fix the technical system,
Hmm.
right, then I can equip it to racist institutions to get different outcomes.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And that's not real.
Hmm.
Right. And so I think it needs to be replaced. And I think the upshot of Winter's theory, and I think it pulls off a lot of the Black experience in slavery, is ontological sovereignty,
Hmm.
right? And the full autonomy of the species to define reality.
Hmm.
And I mean, and if we can accomplish something like that, it won't be through the militarization of these AI systems.
Right.
I think we need to think boldly about the abolition of militarizing these types of systems, just overall.
Yeah. Hmm. You've mentioned before just the idea of, let's say, Gaza, for instance, and being in an open air prison. But wouldn't that effectively be what our neighborhoods will become under this type of technology?
I mean, you can argue it already has. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
I've
For
seen
sure.
evidence. Yeah, I mean, I've seen
Hmm.
evidence, and I cited this in a recent essay about how they've already tracked that more helicopters owned by police departments go over the blacker and poorer the neighborhood, the more aerial flight time.
Wow.
Right. So you don't need a drone to do
Mhm.
that. You've
Right.
already had aerial surveillance. So as drones become more common, they'll just be replaced and unmanned, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think, and that's the importance, I think, of really focusing on ontological sovereignty, right? And what's at stake with this, and reconciling with this paradox, because this same technology that could be equipped with a bomb and kill a person after you show it a picture can deliver medicine to a person that you can't reach through roads,
Hmm.
right? It's in the application of it.
Hmm. Right.
Right. And how do we unyoke this urge that Western civilization has for killing those that it deems inferior to the technological development that allows us to get the most potential out of life?
Yeah. I think you see the same development even in the 80s
Hmm.
under Jimmy Carter's administration, or was that the 70s? under the Jimmy Carter administration, where you had the director of HUD, Reny Curtis. Now remember, sort of the apex of broken windows policing is defensive spaces. I think Elizabeth Hinton, in her work, shows how defensive spaces, in of itself, essentially made what we would call the hood an area of an open air prison,
Mm,
where the spaces upon which the ghettoization of Black people in urban centers of America was made in such a way that they were closed in, and there were security forces. I mean literally, if you ever grew up in the projects, you literally know that there are certain gates that enclose around certain ghettos.
hmm.
There are certain projects where police departments are literally in proximity to,
Yes.
or they patrol constantly. There are certain schools that have metal detectors, prevent you from getting in, but then there's no one telling you not to leave, right? So instead of these dropouts, a lot of people are being pushed out of these
Mhm.
schools. So, uh, yeah, the idea of the open air prison, I think you can see some instantiations of it going through,
And I mean, can I
the
just
late
say about
70s.
those defensive spaces, man? Like they built them in a way that allows for maximum visual type of
Mm,
target
Yeah,
acquisition, right? So if you
exactly.
did something wrong, the spaces between corridors are so wide you can be seen,
Yeah,
right? You can be
mhm,
caught on camera and apprehended.
mhm,
The same type of approach to architecture was actually done in Afghanistan as well because women were not allowed to leave certain spaces for their own safety. They intentionally built dormitories and living spaces for them where the women would go out back and not be seen, and the men would when they leave,
yeah,
right?
wow.
I mean, so this reconfiguration of space itself
Hmm.
better acquire targets among the
hmm
savage male population. I mean, it's just that deep, right? And
Yeah.
it's
now
a very, yeah,
yeah, now it's just technologized to the point where you have complete aerial control. You have Predator Reaper drones that take pictures of people and go hunt them on their own.
Mm. Can you guys talk about how, so, people are listening and or may just be under the assumption that, okay, um, this technology will be used to quote unquote target criminals, right? But, you know, I hate that narrative for one, but also, what about people who they deem as revolutionaries or people that they deem as subversive to the state? This would also they would be surveilled the same way, correct?
correct. And one of the mainstays of coin strategy is to divide revolutionaries from the civilian
Mm,
populations.
hmm.
That goes in alignment with pacification. So you see this in the Vietnam War, um, and you also see this. There was a really good paper called the Cost is Sworn that
What is it
articulates
called?
the cost is sworn
Okay.
by overt Nicholson or Veta Nicholson.
Yeah, I think her name
It's
starts with Dawn. It's Dawn.
Don Veta Nicholson. Yeah,
Mhm.
The cost is
and
more about women, I think. Yeah.
yeah, the cost is sworn by women, and she articulates how the progressive era ideations of gender, masculinity, and femininity inform counterinsurgency strategies in the early 20th century.
Hmm.
And so, one of the goals was to, in many ways, forestall the nationalist project of the Philippines, but it did so by dividing the civilians uh, and the revolutionaries. And so one way to do that was to give certain educational capacities, certain economic incentives to the women who were sometimes subversive, but also knowing that every male, in a sense, became a rebel. It's
Yeah.
the same thing you see in Gaza. Every single male
Hmm.
is bar none thought to be Hamas. Is bar none thought to be a revolutionary,
Hmm.
and so they use that to kill the entire population or to starve out the entire population. Uh, and so every young male starting with the age of 8 is par for the course. And so
That's
that
that
is one of
battle
the
age male idea, right?
Mhm.
And that does
and
and
that's
that applies to us domestically as as black men, would you say?
absolutely, and
Hmm.
it's one of the mainstays of coin strategy.
Hmm.
I mean, even if you look to Stuart Strader's work, when he talks about the structural functionalism that subtends some of the coin strategies, this idea of feedback loops and how they pretty much knew that when you had certain rebellions or certain revolutionary fervor, that this was a time when revolutionaries could literally use their own propaganda and their own means to include the civilian capacities.
Mm,
When you go in and you try to install a liberal democracy, this creates a kind of disarray in the population. And what that means is that you can either win over civilians, but also the revolutionaries can win over civilians. So the goal becomes pacification through social engineering, wherein you can attempt to get these people on your side
mhm.
by dividing the revolutionaries, by offering certain forms of education, by offering certain economic incentives, and you see that today, and I think you see that with this new, what I call intersectional colonialism, because now you have these black female mayors who are no worse than the black male mayors before them, but because of the logics of intersectionality, they're able to use a certain veil of language to incapacitate populations
Mm.
and better install counterinsurgent programs. And this is at least what you see in DC with Mayor Bowser, because in I mean she's cozied up with Trump at this point. I
Right.
mean it's insane.
Yeah, whenever she came out and said that, hey, she's in full support of this, I mean, I
Come on
wasn't
now,
surprised, but I was like, golly, she came
it's
out and
like
said it.
damn,
Yeah, right.
yeah, yeah.
And speaking of that, and speaking about what you just said, as far as coin and the battle age male and the pacification of the rest of the population, when you guys saw the tweet, or I don't know if he said it and somebody just and the White House captioned the tweet or captioned what he said. But whenever he was like, the mothers in Chicago, the women in Chicago are asking me to come and clean up their streets. I mean, can you explain for people that comes in a fine mist to those who don't know what they're seeing, right? Can you explain like the logic behind that as far as the battle age male and pacification and how within coin the I guess how they use women.
Yeah, man. Look, I think it's hard to understate the gendered logic of modern imperialism. It's really hard to understate it, right? Like the self-identity of Western nations and empires is in saving the savage woman from her man.
Mm,
Right. So when you look through the ethnological record and the scientific taxonomy of the savage male target, one of his primary characteristics is his brutality toward women. Right. And this is how he's contrasted with civilized white men.
mm,
Right. This is how imperialism is doing these people a favor
mm,
because it's saving her from the brutal rule of her man. This is not even new with Trump. If you recall the 2016 election that he first won with Hillary Clinton, she met with the mothers of the male victims,
mhm, mhm,
right? She was the missionary that came to grant justice to them by
mhm,
letting them on the stage, right? So there's this manipulation of women and the integration of women that's very unique and strategic. I mean, it's so explicit that one of the leading authors of the leading manual of counterinsurgency for the last war, one of his infamous quotes is that the counterinsurgent must covet his enemy's wife.
mm. Wow.
They say this stuff, right?
Mhm,
And so when Donald Trump is talking about the women calling him, right, that's an old trope he's appealing to that the white population understands quite readily.
Hmm.
And I mean, when you talk about the significance of this on a population, I mean, there's a really good scholar in the UK named Leila Khalili. She has a book called Time in the Shadows.
Hmm.
I cite this quote from her all the time. It's on page 222. She says, in all counterinsurgencies everywhere, any male is fair game.
Mm.
Any male is fair game, right? And so when they're telling you, oh, we're only targeting this unique subset of people, right? Functionally, tactically, that's going to mean the males of that group. If they're non-combatant or elderly, they may be spared if they're
Hmm.
visibly impaired. But outside of that, you're talking about the militaristic control of the group of men and the slight integration of their women into the occupational regimes, institutions.
Mm. That's what I was telling the brother the other day that, those ones that constantly say the YNs, we got to do something. I said, brother, you are the YN. We are all the YN. You know what I
And
mean? From 8 to
you've seen that guy,
60.
right?
What'd you
You've
say?
seen that guy when they deployed the Marines in LA, right?
Right, right,
He's not different.
right,
He's
right,
leaving the VA.
right,
Not exceptional.
right, right.
He's a black looking man.
Yeah.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back. That's
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Where you start.
Hmm. Right, 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 right. Man. Again, you know, first off, I just wanted to give you guys props for the paper, man. The essay really helped me to conceptualize not only winter, but again, what it was supposed to do and show the connection between Western humanist epistemologies and how the Fourth Industrial Revolution and artificial intelligence will be extensions of those logics and will manifest itself in how we are policed. Y'all did a brilliant job on that, and just want to give y'all props for. I know the paper is not out or published yet. I think you said it will be published next month, right?
Yeah, it'll be out next
Yeah.
month.
Okay. Is it okay to tell the people where to look for it?
Yeah, yeah,
What
I'll put
journal?
Yeah.
it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be an American Philosophical Quarterly
Okay. All right. So
sometime in the next couple of months. Proof copy should be out next month.
okay. Okay. Cool. Cool, man. Uh, brother Rennie Taylor, brother Myron, man, I appreciate y'all again. This has been dope, and thank you for your works. And yeah, it's really important, man, because it's especially with the conversations that I have been seeing, conversations that I've had personally, and this welcoming in of the National Guard. And one of the things that this paper kind of has me doing, right, is whenever I see stories like this, with a DC crackdown on police or something in the news involving police, National Guard, or ICE, I start Googling what type of technology was used.
Hmm.
And man, it's like, damn,
Hmm.
but again, thank you guys for your work, man. And I look forward to having you guys on again.
Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you for having us on, man. Appreciate
Absolutely.
you, man. And
No
you're
doubt.
doing a lot of great work too, man. I've been seeing some of the guests you've had on and some of the work that you put into the production and some of the very hard and elevating and edifying questions that you've been asking, man. So definitely, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. Thank you.